Hello, and welcome to this Skill Me Up expert talk on what is a cloud mindset and why is a cloud mindset so critical for successful cloud adoption. My name is Jonathan Tuliani. I'm the European Managing Director for Opportunity. We are the Azure training experts behind skillmeup.com. Prior to joining Opportunity, I spent nearly 10 years at Microsoft, and most of that was in the Azure product group, where I was a program manager for the Azure DNS service and the Azure Traffic Manager service, and worked on various other Azure features. So here at Opportunity, we offer instructor-led training from our dedicated expert instructors. This can be virtual or on-site delivery, and it can be Microsoft official curriculum certification classes or custom advanced classes that we build ourselves in-house. We offer interactive workshops and hackathons for developers, all from our world-class expert instructors. So if you're interested there, please contact sales at opportunity.com. We also offer on-demand online training on a subscription model where you can have access to hundreds of our in-depth expert videos and hands-on labs with a full sandbox lab environment, so you don't have to use your own Azure subscriptions to execute the labs. And we also have live instructor classes on various schedules and expert talks, such as this one. This can help you with all of your certification learning paths, and again is built using unique content that we create in-house from our experts. So there are individual, team, and enterprise subscriptions offering unlimited access. So sign up for a free trial at skillmeup.com. We also offer a platform for managing virtual conferences. So if you need to get a large organization together or across your customer base, you're looking to set up a conference, but you're looking to do a virtual conference, which is of course a huge requirement right now in the era of COVID, then please do take advantage of our virtual conference manager. You can learn more at govirtualconference.com. Here we can set up conferences for you that really try to provide as many of the benefits as possible of an in-house event. So that includes multi-day, multi-track organization, breakout groups and workshops, assigning coaches to work with those breakout groups, interactive networking, virtual expo hall, and many other features that you would see in any other conference. So if you're looking for a virtual conference platform, then please look at govirtualconference.com. And this is all built on Microsoft Teams, of course. So let's move on and talk about cloud mindset. So we're going to start by looking at some of the legacy IT challenges, and in particular how those challenges affect you in a cloud world. And then we're going to talk about a cloud mindset and draw various comparisons between the legacy world and the cloud first world, and look at the kind of mindset shift that's required to take full advantage of the cloud. And at the end, we'll just have a brief discussion of how we can help promote that change in our various roles. What are the behaviors and steps we need to take in order to promote a mindset shift within our organization. So let's start by looking at the typical IT challenges. And typically there's a drive from the business, the CEOs driving perhaps for greater agility. They want to be able to move faster in terms of how they push the business forward. And of course, on the financial side, there's a big drive for operational efficiency. Cloud spend is one of the huge challenges relating to cloud adoption, of course. And the CFOs typically they have this strong drive, of course, to make sure that the dollars they're spending are spent efficiently. And then from a CMO point of view, there is a strong demand for innovation. How can we engage customers in new ways? How can we offer new services? So it's all about agility and innovation and efficiency. And cloud is great at delivering those. It enables our whole IT teams and the developer teams to move so much faster and deliver on this. But the question is, how can you take best advantage of the potential that the cloud can offer? So let's have a look at some typical business needs and IT challenges. So, for example, the business is looking for rapid innovation, but today, in a typical organization, the IT budget, 72% of it is spent on routine maintenance, keep the lights on type functions. So only a tiny fraction of the budget is left over to provide that innovation that the business is looking for. The business wants to connect with the customers and empower the employees, enable things to move more quickly, do new things. But for example, there's a strong demand to do this through mobile applications, but the demand for mobile applications is typically many times the capacity of the IT team to deliver on that demand. So people are frustrated they don't have that connectivity that they would like. And when it comes to decision making, businesses make better decisions if they can make those decisions based on data. But in many cases, the IT department again is a bottleneck to getting and processing and revealing the insight from the data that may be available. Only half the decision makers can get the analysis that they need from the data that may be available, within the organization. And this together, these things they create a wide divide between the business needs and the IT department. It's important that IT can change the way they work in order to close this and enable the business to be more successful and more competitive. Here's another way to look at this. This is called the core and the context. And core and context, this is a distinction that separates the few ideas, the few activities that a company does that create true differentiation. And that's called the core. That's where you can really innovate. And that's in contrast to everything else that the company does just to stay in business. That's the context. So context is all the background, all the stuff just to stay in business. And this model came from Geoffrey Moore. And he articulated this framework in a book called Dealing with Darwin, arguing that a company should manage these two different sorts of activity in very different ways. So if you think about how a new product works, the life cycle of a product, typically a new product starts in the bottom left corner here in the invent corner. This is a non-mission critical, a core activity to come up with a new service or product. And that's where the minimum viable product mindset from a lean startup organization that rules, with the focus here on the learning and the innovation and developing that new product. And then successful products, of course, move kind of in a clockwise manner around this grid. They get deployed up into production, and they become profitable and eventually become mission critical. So they've moved up into the top of the chart there. And of course, as they scale and become more critical, they move from that initial deployment across into the managed square. So this is where they've become a mission critical part of the organization, and they've moved from innovation into context. They're now just one of those services that the organization offers. Now, over time, this may become commoditized, or the organization may move on to other things, and there are always demands to evolve, and competitors are racing hard to match your innovation. So eventually, this thing becomes no longer an innovative offering, but something that's just a standard part of the offering, or may even be something that you can outsource to a different supplier. So in that case, it moves down into the bottom right corner where you can offload and treat this as a commodity. So this is the clockwise path that many innovations take within this space. Okay, so that's the core context model. Now, where does your IT spend sit? Now, the bulk of your IT spend, as we saw in the previous slides, it sits here. It sits in the manage quadrant. This is where you're keeping the lights on and managing your IT. This is where you're spending your budget, and this is where your people are investing their time. And what we would like to do, of course, is to be able to move more of that IT spend into the core area, into the areas that are innovating for your business and enabling you to push the business forward. This is, of course, where the IT spend can deliver a better value. And this is, of course, part of what the cloud is all about, is enabling you to be more efficient in how you're innovating and using your IT spend. So the question is, how can we do that? How can we enable the organization to move the IT spend across to get that advantage without, of course, taking any unnecessary risks, without leaving things in an unmanaged state on the other side? Of course, those critical services still need to be managed effectively. And this is, of course, what the cloud mindset shift is all about. Is about how can you leverage the cloud in an effective way? Because the key thing to remember with the cloud is it requires you to do things differently. If you adopt the cloud and treat it as a drop-in technology replacement, keeping all of your old working practices the same, you've just taken out one piece of IT and you've said, okay, we'll use the cloud instead. If you take that approach, keeping your working practices the same, then you're really not going to take advantage of what the cloud brings. The cloud can enable you to do many things in new ways, enables you to do things more efficiently. It offers new services, a huge potential there in the cloud, but you have to work differently to take advantage of it. And that's what we're going to be talking about now over the next few slides. Okay, so first of all, let's think about infrastructure. Perhaps most people's on-ramp to the cloud is to think about virtual machines. Of course, I'd always be an advocate that virtual machines are a great place to start in the cloud, but don't stop with virtual machines. There's a lot more to the cloud than virtual machines, and if you stop at virtual machines, then you're only taking part of the value that the cloud can deliver. But as I say, this is the most common on-ramp for people into the cloud, and it still offers huge value over on-premises IT. So let's have a look. If you're used to your on-premises IT, there's a mindset of the staff, of the people who work in that IT department. So let's think about the way the people work in on-premises IT. So typically they'll provision servers for peak demand. There'll be a particular application. They'll look at what the peak demand is for that application. Maybe it's around the holiday season, and they'll provision to make sure they have that demand covered with some buffer room, because maybe they're buying the IT and these servers are going to last 3 or 5 years, so they have to look at some forecasts for future growth and so on. So they're provisioning for peak demand, which means, of course, that a huge amount of the usage of those machines is underutilized. It's routine for traditional IT to run at very low CPU utilization percentages. For example, single digits, under 5% is commonplace for traditional IT. And of course, that represents a huge amount of capacity that is being paid for that is not delivering for the business. So provisioning for peak demand is a first part of that on-premises mindset. And with that peak demand, of course, you're provisioning for a fixed size. Changing your traditional IT is hard. So you plan ahead what you're going to need, and you provision really a fixed size. And if you need more capacity, it's typically a scale-up mentality. We're going to replace that server with a bigger server, rather than thinking about horizontal scale and adding more servers. So it's this fixed size or scale-up mentality that's required. And these machines are always on. You provision the servers and they just sit there in your data center, powered up, and they're running. Maybe the application hasn't been deployed yet. Maybe the project isn't going to get to that stage for another 2 months. Still, the machines are going to be powered up and running. Everything sits there ready to go. That's the mentality we have on premises. That also means it's not only on, but typically machines are being patched. I've seen examples where machines could be running for 2 years in the data center unused, but they're being patched every month. They're being maintained just in case we need them. So this is the always on mentality. It's got an electricity cost. It's got a cost across the board in terms of the cost to maintain that machine. Obviously, that's also then an asset that has been paid for and is depreciating, that isn't delivering value if it isn't being used. Also, with on-premises IT, you have this problem that it takes a long time to set up. You can be provisioning hardware 3 months before you need it. This, of course, has costs in terms of depreciation and so on, and getting utilization from that hardware. But also, it has a huge impact in terms of how you can plan and provision. You don't really know what you need at the time you're having to make the purchasing decision, perhaps. And you have it drives the old-fashioned waterfall development cycles. It's these kind of long lead times force organizations into a waterfall style plan upfront model of how they do IT, and that waterfall style then stifles agility across the entire project. So it's a major driver of the waterfall mentality. This kind of IT it's built and it's deployed in situ. So you'll think, okay, I need this server for this application. So you create that server and then it's sitting there. You can point at it. You can put your hand on it. It's that's the server that does this, and it's very much you build it in situ. You deploy in situ. It's a thing you can reach out and touch. And again, because of the long lead times and because resources are scarce, people do have a hoarding mentality around it. It's like, these are my servers. People tend to want to own certain bits of infrastructure, keep them as backups in case they need them, and so on. So again, there can be an overhead associated with all of that. It's a mentality of hoarding and so on that comes with that. Now let's compare that with a cloud mindset. With the cloud, of course, you can turn things on and off very easily, and you can resize them very easily. It's a completely different model. It only takes minutes to make these kind of changes. So here you should think much more about what is the utilization of your machines rather than provisioning for peak demand. Well, how do we just scale to meet the demand when it comes about, if it comes about? How do we keep our utilization high so that we keep the CPU running pretty warm? Hey, if it starts to get a little bit too warm over a threshold, we can easily resize the machine, or we can easily add new machines. So we have a scale out model rather than a scale up and down. So here, of course, we're paying for what you use. So if you can keep your utilization high, then you're only paying for what you actually need, and you're getting good value for the bucks that you're paying. So think about that mentality of consuming and paying just for what you use, minimizing waste, driving down those unused cycles, scaling up and down as you need it, auto scaling where you can. Another thing here, remember previously we talked about the 3-month provisioning, and then you're building and deploying in situ. If you need 2 environments, well, you're going to buy 2 lots of servers. With the cloud, you can use what's called infrastructure as code. So your whole deployment, including provisioning the machines, is not a manual task anymore. It's just a script that you run effectively. If you need another environment, sure, just run the script again with some different settings, with a new name for the environment, and create another one. When you're finished with it, turn it off again. You need 3 test environments for your test teams just this month. Spin them up, turn them off when you're done. So you have this ability to create environments and destroy them. You can create a new one every morning for your test team, destroy it in the evening, and make a new one the next day. So you no longer have this. It's no longer something you can reach out and touch. It's something that you can it's something much more ephemeral that you can create and deploy, and then tear down again and just create another one, because it's all scriptable, it's all automated infrastructure as code. And of course, there's no requirement for lead time. The capacity is typically there, and you no longer have to have this hoarding mentality. You don't have this worry that you won't be able to get hold of a server. You can always get hold of a server. Just spin one up when you need it. So a very different mindset in terms of how you approach IT. Now let's look at how we think about processes, some of the standard processes that we have within the organization, relating to how IT is applications are developed and how they're handed over to IT departments and how they're operated. Let's look at some of these process questions. So then the legacy IT culture is often a very over-the-wall culture. You have developers are developing an application. Remember, the business has given them requirements. The developers develop it. They pass it over to a testing team. That gets passed over to an operations team. So you have this over-the-wall siloing between these different teams as deliverables are passed down the pipe from one to the other. Whereas in the cloud, what works much better is to create cross-functional teams and DevOps teams. So you break down these silos and you merge these teams, because you can move much more quickly. You can do things much more quickly in the cloud, and as a result, you don't want these silo boundaries slowing you down. These silos are going to become your constraint once you take away the technology constraints of traditional IT. So you need to break these constraints. Think about how you merge these teams. Get the business to work much more closely with the developers and the IT department. Move developers into DevOps models so that developers are responsible not just for creating the application, but also for the day-to-day operations of that application. This is the model adopted by all the top technology companies. You look at how Amazon works, how Microsoft works, how Facebook works. They all work in this DevOps model where the team who writes the code, they're also the ones who operate the service. And this is key, because any operational issues that come up, maybe something doesn't run quite as smoothly as it should do, well, they're the guys who are empowered to fix it. The developers can then, address those issues and bake those fixes back into the service. Whereas in the over-the-wall model, it's very hard for operations to drive requirements back up the chain to the developers. The developers is what are being fed from the business, not from below by operations. So you end up with problems in the deployment that are fixable, but which are causing the operations team pain. The operations team just have to live with them. They have to work around them rather than getting the developers to fix them. In a DevOps model, the pain is felt by the people with the power. So you can get those things addressed much more easily. Second line here. So the rigid standards. Typical organizations in the legacy model have very fixed standards on how IT is done. So they're very procedural and very prescriptive about the way things are implemented. In the cloud, as you move towards these DevOps models, there's a need to decentralize. We're going to talk more about that on the next slide, but there's a need really to enable these teams to have more accountability and autonomy. And as a result, they have rather than these rigid standards, you should still provide guidelines, provide reference architectures, provide design patterns that the teams can use. But the reason they're going to use these is because it helps them. They shouldn't be enforced from above as a mandate. You must work this way. Where possible, of course, you should just enable the teams, and they will want to pick up these reference architectures and patterns because it helps them do their job better. So empower the teams and drive towards standards with the value that they bring. The command and control model of legacy IT related to the rigid standards. This is where, for example, governance controls, you have gates in legacy IT where the security team has to sign off and the networking team has to sign off and so on. You have these rigid gates, you have this control organization, all designed to bring whatever the developer teams are doing into a standard model. Now, with the cloud, you have much more flexibility here. Now, you still need to think about governance, and you need to think about the controls you have here. No one wants to create a free-for-all, which could lead to unexpected costs or too much diversity in the platform, or mismanagement of cloud resources. So you need to have a good cloud governance in place. I'm a huge fan of having the right governance structures in place. But ideally here, these should be kind of automated guardrails, and the cloud platforms have a lot of features built into them to enable you to create these guardrails. So rather than a manual gate requiring a human to come in and do the security review or do the networking review, you provide these guardrails that are providing your governance framework. They're keeping you safe, but within those guardrails, the application teams are free to move forward at their own pace. The enforcement has moved from being manual to being automated, so no one is being slowed down. They're working within their guardrails and they're moving forward at their own speed. That's the model we should aim for with the cloud culture. The IT department and their relationship, and the developers and their relationship with the business changes. So IT in a traditional model is an order taker. Other teams, the business, tells IT what they need. These requirements are very much driven down. Whereas with the cloud IT, in order to innovate in the way that agile teams can in the cloud, there's a need for the IT and the application teams to work much more closely with the business. And this requires them to understand the business and to take up more of a challenger mentality. Rather than just having a one-way flow, it should be a two-way conversation. Understand why the business is asking what they're asking for. Be part of the conversation. Think about the solutions. Come up with alternative approaches if there's better options out there. So it becomes a two-way relationship with the business, and that can lead to a lot of value. For example, there may be all kinds of data that can come out of the IT side on utilization that you can feed into the business for how they optimize their service. Maybe there's data on how customers are using the service, which the business can extract value from. So by working in this two-way approach, you can actually innovate and provide more value for the customers and for the company. Next item there, think about a centralized approach. We've talked about this, where you have this control structure, and typically this control structure is also very centralized. You have a single IT department, a single set of standards. Everything is being piped through this common approach. And with the cloud, again, to empower the teams, what you want to do is to decentralize, drive this outwards into the organization and empower the teams to make their own decisions. It's all about enabling those teams to be autonomous. So that's a very different model there. The next slide talks a bit more about this. The next line there, you think about the structured and predictable nature of legacy IT, and this on the last line there talks about fear of failure. Typical IT processes are designed around things must work. They're avoiding failure. Everything is planned to the nth degree, double checked, triple checked. Everything is very designed to be very predictable and repeatable. Whereas in the cloud, because you can move much more quickly, well, if a mistake happens, you can just fix it. It's so much easier to fix the issues as they arrive. I remember working in a legacy IT mindset. It took 2 weeks to make the simplest network change. Whereas in the cloud, you can just make that change in a couple of minutes. So you no longer need to be quite as heavy on the upfront planning. You don't have to be quite as structured. There's no longer that fear of failure because well, you can experiment and you can iterate. You can learn from that, you can fail fast, and you can move quickly. So you can just change that around into something that's much more dynamic. If you still have the legacy mindset, that fear of failure, it'll slow you down. It'll take away that ability to innovate. So if you can move to the right-hand side of this slide, if you can take on that innovative, empowering approach, that enables your teams to deliver value faster. It enables your teams to have a bigger impact on the business. So that's the goal here. You move more quickly, move more efficiently, and deliver more value. That's what we're trying to achieve. I said we'd talk more about this centralized versus decentralized question. So on the left, you see the standard centralized model. Your command and control has been centralized, and this is all built around manual processes. It gives a very predictable approach, but it can act as a bottleneck. Typically, these are manual reviews. In the decentralized model, your teams have become autonomous. They're making their own independent decisions, working within the guardrails that you set. The central IT team, perhaps a cloud center of excellence within that team, still has a very important role to play. They're going to define best practices. They're going to create reusable design patterns, architecture patterns. They're going to implement the guardrails that protect the organization from a governance point of view. There's still a huge role for that central IT team, but it's a different role. It's no longer about these rigid processes and enforcement. It's about enabling other teams to be successful in a safe way. That enables those teams to be very agile. It enables speed and scale across the organization, as opposed to being a bottleneck in the centralized model. So this is what we're trying to move to enable the agility that the cloud offers. Just having a little bit of a thought about the cost management side. This is one of the biggest challenges organizations face with the cloud. So let's think about the cost pieces here. So in the traditional IT, traditional financial management, you're looking at an annual budget. You're looking at doing some monthly chargeback on your spend. You're going to have a bunch of servers in your data center, and you're going to be charging back the business for the servers they use. And that's like peanut butter. If there's 1,000 servers, you're just dividing your cost by 1,000, and you're spreading it across the business according to the number of servers they require. So it's a very standardized model. It's managed through the finance department. There are leads in the group that are the budget owners deciding keeping track of their budgets and so on. So this is the traditional model. Now, when we move to the cloud, of course, the costs are much more dynamic. So your costs can go up and down week to week, day by day, according to what you have deployed. And especially as you're scaling to match demand, things are becoming a much more dynamic. And this gives you a lot more control over your costs, but they also do become rather less predictable. You need to be able to change your cost thinking, to think of this as a cost the business is incurring coming out of your OPEX rather than CAPEX, of course. So it's related to the volume of business you've got coming in. Well, that's going to drive the costs that you have on the cloud that's providing that, enabling that business. So it's a different model. It's much more fluid. Now, what you do have is you have the ability to do much more fine-grained cost reporting. You get a fine-grained bill of every single resource that you're using, and you can tie that back to the business. So the business can understand exactly which services they're running and what it's costing to run those. And if they turn off one of those services or scale it back, that cost saving is a real cost saving they reveal that they benefit from straight away. If the business turns around and says, we don't need those 5 servers anymore in a traditional IT world, well, the 5 servers are still sitting there. You're still paying for the building and all the other costs that come with it. They're just going to do a different peanut butter distribution of costs, next time around. So the costs to a business are not so clear. The incentives for the business to reduce unnecessary usage aren't as strong. Whereas in the cloud, the moment you turn something off, you stop paying for it. So the business and the IT can work much more closely together to make sure that the IT is delivering real value and that the business understands the value and the costs coming together. So this of course involves different people. You still have finance managers, you still have budget owners, but they're going to have to think in a different way. They're going to have to think in a more fluid way. Think about the finance department, for example. In the old model, accounts payable, well, they're just paying the invoices, when you do an initial purchase and for ongoing costs for your data center. Whereas now, accounts payable, they're paying for your cloud subscriptions. If they're late, if they have a substantial delay on their payment, the cloud provider may shut down your services or suspend your services. So now accounts payable are able to create an outage on your live side. That's an important change. So it isn't necessarily a problem, but it's important to be aware of it. Think about how you can work with your finance team to make sure that doesn't happen in an unexpected way. So stay on top of the implications of these changes, as they go across the organization. The other big one here is you see the software developers have now got a role in the green tile there on the right-hand side. In the old world, software developers typically didn't think about costs. They'd think about performance and they think about scale, and they think about reliability. They think about all these questions. They think about security, and they think about compliance. But that cost hasn't been on their radar. It just hasn't been a concern for how the developers develop software. But now, as the developers move into DevOps roles, and as the decisions that they make day to day on the architecture of their application and the resources it's going to consume, those architecture decisions, they have a direct impact on the bill that you're going to get for that service when it's deployed. So the developers now do need to become cost conscious. The cost of an application needs to be baked into that initial design thinking. So at the same time as thinking about the scale and the performance and the security and so on, you've got to think about the cost efficiency upfront as one of those design pillars. So that's a big change for developers. In the same way that when the internet came along, developers had to become much more conscious about security issues. Now the cloud has come along, a similar shift has to happen. Developers have to get a lot more cost conscious in the way that they work. So that's a big change for the developers. Now, you're making these changes. It's very important, if you're on the technology side, that you learn to communicate, not just in the technical language of what it is you're doing, but in the value that the changes you're making delivers. So this slide tries to explain that with a set of examples. So, for example, you might say that IT is working more closely with the business. Okay, that's great. But what's the value? Well, the value is in the innovation and agility that can come for the business. We might say that the application is secure by design. Well, what does that mean for the business? Well, perhaps it means continuous regulatory compliance. It means you're in line with those regulatory compliance requirements. Maybe it means reduced risk of vulnerabilities. We could say on the left, continuous monitoring with anomaly detection. It's all this technical security stuff. Well, what does that mean? Well, perhaps it means you have better insight into your end user experience. Maybe we talk on the left about DevOps tools and continuous integration, continuous deployment. So they're these much more agile development processes. Well, what does that mean in terms of your business? You're able to scale up and scale down. Maybe you're able to deploy into different geographies, expand your market. Deliver bug fixes, deliver new features more quickly. Decentralized operations, well, that can give you efficiency and accountability into each individual team. Cloud-based solutions, well, that enables you to focus on the business and spend less of your cycles focused on IT issues. So always make sure, if you're an IT person, that you understand the things on the left, but choose your language to suit your audience. Make sure you can clearly articulate the value to the business. A big challenge for IT is that they need to understand the business. The IT and the business need to work closer together. And that means the business people need to learn more about IT and understand more about the cloud. And the IT people need to understand more about the business, get more involved in that side of the inside of the business, and so they can articulate the value here. Okay, so from this, hopefully you have a little bit of an idea of the kind of shift in thinking that's required within an organization, not just within IT, but across an organization when it comes to thinking about the cloud. For this last slide, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the kind of shift in culture, the shift in thinking that's required, and how, as an organization, you can help drive that. And that's a big topic. Change management is a huge topic in its own right. We could talk for a week on change management, and there are experts and specialists in this space. But let's just look at some of the principles here. So the first thing is it starts with the leadership. The leadership must be willing to drive this change, and they must be willing to assume a level of risk and responsibility for enabling this change. So that means setting strategic goals for cloud adoption, making clear to the whole organization, what is the plan for the cloud? What is the value the business is looking for from this plan? Why are we doing this? So make sure that strategy is clear. And also the high-level plan for how that's going to be executed upon. What does it mean for people in terms of the training they're going to need, in terms of how roles are going to evolve? Think about those aspects. What does it mean in terms of processes that need to change? Make sure that there's an executive mandate clearly articulating the fact that processes will need to change and who's responsible for driving those changes, so that people who are currently on the processes aren't being resistant to that change. Make sure that mandate is very clear, that they recognize that these things have to be adapted. And lastly, for the executives, make sure that you're creating a culture that's based on learning and not a culture based on blame. There's a common phrase: you can't fire your way to high reliability. In the same way, to move to the cloud, it has to be something that's very supportive. Make sure that, in terms of your team and the challenges they're facing, the chances are is there's a lot that's going to be new for them. There may be issues along the way. You've got their back. You support the change because you've set the bigger vision. You know why this is happening. You know why this change is worth doing and what you're going to get out of it at the end of the road. Moving to the second tile here. So when you think about development teams and the support teams, they need to step out of their comfort zones here. So business and development teams, they need to break down those existing silos. Operations teams work more closely with developers, moving to DevOps. So breaking down silos, working more closely together. That's a key step here. Changing those processes. You have the mandate from the leadership now, so be willing to reinvent those development and IT processes. I've worked in a team, for example, where we went from shipping every month, we went to shipping every week, we went to shipping even more frequently than that. So change those processes. Find out how you can ship into production more frequently. How can you become more agile? And invest in the skills you need, not just to do lift and shift into infrastructure as a service, but to modernize applications, modernize not just new applications, but also existing assets. So you're moving away from the legacy overhead. You'll be able to then, once you've moved away from that overhead, you'll be able to move more of that budget from the context to the core. More of that budget can go into the innovation and delivering for the business. And then lastly, on the IT side, again, the willingness to change processes, decentralized control is very important. We've talked about that. Hanging on to the control is going to stifle the innovation. Think about how the IT team, central IT, has a new role. It's not like the role is going away. It's just become a new role. This guy you can see in the picture, he's got a big rack of servers behind him that he manages. Those servers might go away, but think what he can do now, providing governance controls across thousands of servers in the cloud. So there's a huge amount of work to be done to create those guardrails, to define those architecture practices. There's a huge amount of new work that needs to be done to create the governance controls, the cost management reporting, you name it. There's a lot of things to be done right in the cloud, and IT bring a lot of experience and value to that. But it's important that they recognize the need to change, to deliver new kinds of value in a cloud-first world. Okay, that brings us to the end of this expert talk. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you've all found it valuable. Do come into skillmeup.com and listen to other expert talks that we're going to be bringing in the past and over coming weeks. Just to recap, Optionality, we offer instructor-led training, dedicated expert instructors, certification classes and custom classes built with our own materials as well as Microsoft official curriculum. These can be delivered on-site or virtually. And we also include interactive workshops, hackathons, all from world-class expert instructors. And then on Skill Me Up, we have online learning where you can subscribe for unlimited access at an individual team or enterprise level. You have learning paths for all the different Azure certifications, Microsoft 365 certifications, Office 365, and so on, and much, much more. So hundreds of classes on there, including hands-on labs. We give you the lab environment. We give you the lab guide. You can come in and build your skills hands-on with our hands-on labs, and also new challenge labs where you can validate what you do with a set of our Skill Me Up challenges. And then if you're looking to organize a virtual conference, then do have a look at Virtual Conference Manager. This enables you to do at-scale conferences with many of the features of a traditional conference, including breakout groups, expo halls, managed assignments, self-assigned groups, different multi-track, multi-day events, a huge range of flexible options here, all built on Microsoft Teams. So look at Virtual Conference Manager if you have requirements in that space. And thank you very much from all of us here at Skill Me Up, and thank you for listening. Bye-bye.